Beyond the Scope podcast presented by NDMD Productions and made possible by Augusta Podcast, now part of Get Up Productions, your one-stop shop for launching your podcast. Let Get Up do all the heavy lifting and give you the tools you need to turn your podcast dreams into a reality. Learn more at augustapodcast.com/NDMD. I'm your host, Andy, third-year medical student, and if you're familiar with the NDMD YouTube channel, you'll know that we love sharing stories from students, residents, and attendings of different medical professions while giving you an inside look into their lives, not just as healthcare workers, but as the incredible people they are as well. This podcast continues the mission of sharing the incredible stories and experiences of students, physicians, and healthcare professionals, but this time it's all about the things those years of medical training doesn't prepare you for, things that are beyond the scope of our practice. So whether that's navigating starting a family as a med student or physician, learning how to invest and take care of your finances, the goal is to bring on incredible role models who can guide you through those puzzling questions. Now, with that being said, let's introduce today's guest. And today we have a familiar face to the channel. I had the pleasure of filming with him in Scottsdale, Arizona, where I got to see his beautiful plastic surgery practice and get to know a little bit about his story, which we will dive into very shortly. As a non-traditional medical student starting med school at 27, Dr. Brown has given his all to the field and found a unique passion for shedding light on the field of plastic surgery. With over 100,000 followers on Instagram, 680,000 subscribers on YouTube, and a whopping 7.7 million on TikTok, I'm pretty sure all of those numbers have increased since the last time I looked at them. Dr. Brown has inspired many to learn more about the intricacies of surgery and teaches his audience to fall in love with medicine at any age. So join me in welcoming him to the podcast and back to the channel. How are you doing, Dr. Brown, from the blazing hot deserts of Arizona?
I'm melting. No, I'm doing great, man. We just stay inside. That's the key. But no, I'm doing awesome, man. I'm excited to be back on the show. Obviously, our 73 questions episode was so much fun.
Yeah, I just have fond memories of that trip in general. Both your video and the vlog that kind of took everyone behind the scenes of your practice, which, by the way, if you haven't watched any of those, if you're watching the YouTube version of it, links will be somewhere in the top corners. But it really has been a joy to, one, see just amazing physicians, surgeons that are merging their passion for medicine with their creative life, but also just, get to know somebody that is also a non-traditional student, but on, I think, the completely other end of the spectrum. And I know you were busy earlier today. You just came from a procedure. I'm curious, what were you doing?
Some liposuction.
Liposuction. You said that it's like, it's bread and butter, easy procedure.
Passing the magic wand around. No, the joke is most plastic surgeons don't enjoy doing lipo. It's very labor intensive work. But I got to tell you, in the last few years, I've realized if you do it well and you do it right, it can make a huge difference for people. So I do take it to heart and try to do a good job. And I've learned to sort of enjoy it. No, I do. It's just labor intensive, man. It's like a second workout every day.
Oh, man. It's fun, though. I'm sure.
Yeah. Look, dude, I'm blessed and lucky that people even allow me to operate on them. So
that's a really good attitude to have for any surgeon, really. But we'll keep things moving. For those who are unfamiliar with you, Dr. Brown, can you introduce where you're from, what undergrad you went to, and what major, and what medical school you went to?
Yeah, so my name is Ricky Brown. I'm actually from Macon, Georgia, which is where I was born. That's right, Georgia baby. And we moved to Atlanta when I was about 13. And I first went to college at Syracuse, believe it or not, for my first 2 years. So freshman and sophomore year, left Georgia, went to the frigid Northeast. And after a couple of years of over 200 inches of snow at Syracuse, I transferred back to the University of Georgia. And actually, when I was at Syracuse, my major, ironically, was speech communications. It was the one they chose for me. It was the school I got into because I really had no true desire to do anything as far as major was concerned. I didn't know what I wanted to do. So then I transferred to Georgia, and that's where I ended up deciding that I wanted to go to med school and completing all my pre-med stuff.
Gotcha. And now I know that we discussed this a bit while I was over in Arizona. Again, if you haven't watched those videos, please go watch them. They're some of my most favorite videos I've ever made on the channel.
I'm
But
flattered, honored.
it, I am not saying it for flattery. I really do believe those are some of my favorite videos.
It was fun, man. I had such a great time, so I'm excited to
And
be
I know a
here.
big chunk of one of those videos was a really heartfelt story about your path to medicine. And
Yeah.
today, I really want to do a deep dive into your story because I know a lot of people need to hear it. And you
Yep.
were, like I mentioned before, you were a non traditional medical student, right?
Yeah. Yep. So, kind of crazy. My dad and my mom, my dad started a computer company back in the 80s, and they sold computers to medical practices. They were automating offices way back then, mostly appointment scheduling and all of the financial reports behind the scenes, not so much EMR. That hadn't come on the scene yet. So, I'd always been around medicine. Medicine, I was always around doctors because those were my parents' clients, right? So, you know, that's why when I was at Georgia, I really didn't know what I wanted to do, and I was just not a great student. I think that was reflective in my disinterest from having anything that I wanted to do. So yeah, when I was there, I had a pushback moment, and I'll never forget this moment. So I when I transferred there, I was still speech communications. Then I started saying, maybe I'll go work for my parents' company. I don't know what I'm going to do. Maybe I'll take over dad's company. So I went pre-business and I started taking business law and accounting and all the business classes. And one night sitting at the library, I literally at Georgia, I was like, I cannot stand studying economics. This is horrible. Like, I can't imagine doing this stuff, supply and demand curves. And I didn't have the foresight to understand that that's really not all business was. But at that moment, that was in my mind, right? So that was the moment when I really started to soul search about what I wanted to do and started thinking about how much I'd always loved science, how much I'd always enjoyed being around doctors and the things that they did I thought were really cool. But because I wasn't such a great student, I just don't think I ever really had the confidence to think that I would be able to do it.
And
So that's kind of how it all started.
if you don't mind me asking, what was your GPA and stuff looking like at that time?
Yeah, everyone loves to talk about this, and they're amazed when I talk about this. So my overall GPA was about a 2.6 at that time, and I think in high school I graduated with a 3.0, and I really didn't work that hard in high school. I was a very sports oriented guy, totally distracted from academia. It didn't really interest me, but I got the work done and I did decent. So I had a 2.6 when I decided that this was going to be my path, which is insane.
Jeez. And
So
now,
ignorance is bliss, man. I mean, ignorance is total bliss at that time. But here's the thing, it didn't matter. So I don't know if you want me to continue to I don't want to keep going. I know you're going to tease this out of me, but I essentially, when I decided that medicine was going to be my thing, that I wanted to become a doctor, it didn't just happen that easily. So I, was like, look, I hate this business stuff. I like science. I'm not going to tell my parents. I'm going to sign up for Chem 101. So I took basic chemistry and I got an A. And I really didn't feel like I worked that hard. It just jived with my brain. So I was like, oh, wow, like maybe I'm onto something. Like maybe I'm more of a science minded guy. So I was like, let me take Chem 102. And I took 102 and I got an A. And I was like, holy crap. So that got my wheels turning of like, something in healthcare. I wasn't still thinking medicine, but I was thinking, I don't know if I would go into nursing or maybe become a PA, or I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I got a job at the hospital being a patient transporter. And that was my introduction to medicine.
and kind of elaborate about your experience as a patient transporter and how that pointed you not just to medical school, but also to surgery and plastic surgery eventually.
Yeah, so I think, a guy who's 51, I've had a lot of time to reflect over my strengths and weaknesses in life. And one of the things that I was always really, really good at, and I still am, is communication, talking to people, being personable, making people feel comfortable when they've just met me. That was like a big thing that I realized looking back on myself. And so that patient transport experience allowed me to firsthand like comfort patients. And I'm just like some kid in college, right? Taking them from ultrasound to surgery, from surgery back to their room, just transporting people around the hospital. I was having conversations with patients, and I was like enjoying the conversations that we were having because I felt like I was easing their minds. And so, how does that relate to where I am now? Well, I don't think there'd be any doctor on the planet that would tell you now that being able to communicate and talk to patients, no matter what your specialty is paramount to your success. People no longer accept like, oh, he's a jerk, but he's a good doctor. I think most people want the good doctor and the kind bedside manner. They want both together. So that was a strength that really played into my corner when I set out on this journey to try to get into medical school.
Yeah. And your med school application process was quite the journey, wasn't it? And I think a lot of
Oh,
people
yeah.
would love to hear about that.
Yeah, so I'll take you guys through the whole thing. So I basically decided that I wanted to go to medical school. I sat down and mapped it all out, like how long it would take me. So I was a senior in college. I was about to graduate and go work for my parents. So I like laid it all out. I was like, okay, when I was at Syracuse, I took a bunch of psych classes. I had enough psych classes to switch my major to a bachelor's of science in psychology because I really didn't need too many psychology classes to complete that degree, but I needed all the pre-med stuff. So I had mapped it out such that if I stayed where I was, I could do a full year, go a full summer, full load, and another like couple of quarters at Georgia because we were on the quarter system. And I'd be able to finish my pre-med, study for the MCAT, take that in the summer, and then apply. So that's exactly what I did. I went home, told my parents, mapped it out. My mom was like, you got my full support. I think a part of the story that you'll probably, we should come back to, maybe write this down, was how my dad received that. And then what happened with my pre-med advisor. But so just continuing on is, so I basically mapped it out, man. And I was like, look, I want to go to med school. I think I do want to be a doctor. I've made this decision. I told my mom and my dad about the 2 A's I'd gotten in my chemistry classes. And they were like, my mom was like, cool, like go for it. You have my full support. And my dad supported me, but was skeptical because he'd been around doctors. He knew how hard it was to get into medical school. He knew that I'd struggled in school for so long, and he knew what I was up against. So I don't think he was telling me no. My dad just gave me a very strong, I don't know, man, like you really need to consider this. So needless to say, I didn't listen. And that was one of the driving forces for me to really push forward. But so I go back to school and I map it all out, and basically ended up with like a 3.8 science GPA after I completed all my pre-med classes. So clearly found my place, did really well. And that only brought my overall up to a 3.0. So there was no guarantee. Like it's still a numbers game, right? Like, like 4.0 people don't get in. So by no means was I sitting back going, oh man, like I crushed it. Like I'm good. They're going to see that I've improved and they're going to want me, because that's not how I thought that it was going to go. So I took the MCAT that summer and I didn't do very well. I got like a 26, I think. At that time, it was the old scoring system, and 30 or better was competitive at that time. So I took the MCAT a second time after taking the Princeton review, and I got a 30. And then I applied to like 50 schools, and I moved back home and I got a job working in the operating room as an orderly.
And how many interviews did you get?
One.
And you had to work for that one interview, didn't you?
Yeah, so I'll tell you that story. So, so I apply to my schools. I think this is like a valuable lesson for some of the pre-meds that are out there right now doubting themselves. And something I think I talk about on my social media a lot, right, is putting your neck out there, and you sometimes you just have to take a risk because you have no choice, right? Like it's either you put your neck out there and get it cut off, and then you get up and keep going, or you do nothing and you get no results. So yeah, I basically was getting rejection letter after rejection letter, and I decided one day, I was like, man, this is crap. Like I'm not going to sit back and wait to just get rejected from every school that I applied to. So I went down the list of all the schools I hadn't heard from yet, and I just started calling schools, admissions offices, and trying to like not be the annoying guy, but just like looking for that one break. Well, it just so happened that when I called the Chicago Medical School, this girl, Danny, who worked in the admissions office, picks up the phone. We start talking, super cool girl. We have a really good conversation. I kind of tell her my story. And she said, listen, I'm going to take your application and see if I can stick it in front of the director of admissions face. Sometimes they'll do phone interviews, and if they like what they hear on the phone talking to you, they'll occasionally invite you for the interview. We'll just see what happens. And I was like, thank you. That's like all I'm looking for is a break, right? So if I hadn't called, that never would have happened. So long story short, I get the phone interview, crush it, have a great conversation. Like a week later, I get a letter for an in-person interview at the Chicago Medical School, go on my interview. And as I knew, I just needed to get in front of people. I knew that if I got in front of people that I could close the deal. And that was the only school I interviewed at, and that was the only school that I got accepted to.
One shot. That's all you need.
That's all you need.
And
And I realize that people will hear this and go, oh, well, he was lucky, or, it's harder today. It's different. No, let me just tell you something. It might be competitive. It's always been competitive, and it could have easily gone the other way. I could have easily not gotten in. But if I hadn't taken that shot to put myself out there and try to make it happen, I would have never been accepted. If I had sat back and just waited, I guarantee you I would have gotten rejection letters from every school, and I never would have gotten in. So that's you just got to give it a go. There's no other way.
you got to really want it.
You do. And I mean, look, there was no B plan for me, right? Like I'm 26 years old at the time, thinking, what the hell am I going to do with my life? I want to be a doctor. If I don't get in, I'm going to figure out what I have to do to get in, whether it's DO school, go to post back, whatever it was, I was prepared to do that, but I wasn't thinking that way. Like all I said to myself every day was, there is no way that I am not getting in somewhere. Like I'm making that happen to the best of my ability.
And I'm not on any sort of admissions committee or anything like that, but I think a common theme, especially kind of on the reverse end when I was applying to the BSMD program, was they're just looking for commitment to medicine. And, that simple gesture of calling people up and really, putting yourself out there is that little notion that these admissions committees are looking for of you really want to be here. Nobody's making you be here. You're not doing it for the money. You're not doing it for the prestige. You're doing it because you really want to be here. And that will trickle down and eventually translate into incredible care for your patients. And that's something that was always emphasized to me, and what I emphasize to a lot of people applying to any accelerated program, because it's something they look for. And it's harder to find in a 17, 18-year-old kid, coming straight out of high school. But the concept is the same. They're looking for lifelong commitment, because I'm sure you can attest as, a very seasoned surgeon, you're always learning and you're always, in this for the rest of your life.
Oh, forever, dude. I mean, look, what was I going to say? You have to tell your story. That's what I tell people. You have to tell your story, and you're right. They're looking for real people and authenticity. And I think when you're truly passionate about something and you want it for the right reasons, that comes through in your conversation. So for me, I didn't have to convince them to give me a shot. I wasn't trying to convince them, but I told them my story, and I told them why I didn't do well in school and why I felt that I did well now. And having shown that I feel that I can for sure handle medical school clearly, academically, but this was what my passion was. And so I told my story. That was my story. Everyone has a story. And I think that people need to remember that, forget about trying to convince people. If you're really just being authentic and telling people your story, they're going to feel that. Right? We all feel when people are being fake versus real. It's really easy to spot. So that's one thing that I would tell you about authenticity. You just gotta show up and be authentic, and people feel that.
Absolutely. Now, this kind of goes along with wondering what your pre-med advisor and your dad's reaction was. But would you say that there's an age that is too late to go to med school and be a doctor?
So there was a nurse in my class who was 42, and she went back to med school. So So if you think about it from the standpoint of she was 42, she spent 4 years in med school, so she's going to be 46. She wanted to go into primary care, so it was a little bit shorter residency. She was practicing by 50. For her to have another 10 to 20 years even in medicine was worth it for her, right? So I think it's an individual thing. Is there a time where it's too late? Well, yeah. I mean, I do think there is, right? Like there's a point at which it's so much. It's such a long journey. It's a huge investment. It's a lot to do. And I used to say no. I used to say it's never too late. But I think that question really depends on who you are, where you are in life, and when you're looking ahead at your life, what do you see in your future? And if you only have, 30 years left in your life, do you want to spend 15 of those trying to become a doctor? And if you do, then go for it. So I think it's a very individual thing, but I do think that there's a point at which you're too old. But look, man, if you want to do something, you have to go for it, because I think the worst thing that you can ever do in life is to, when you're ahead 30 years from now, to look back and go, man, why didn't I at least give it a shot? Right? Like, I think you always want to be able to put it all out on the floor and look back and go, look, I tried and I didn't get in. I was kind of older, but I did it. And I don't ever have to ever think about that I didn't try to do something that was in my heart.
Absolutely. And I think kind of a piggyback question off of your response. What are some things that you should consider when thinking about going into med school later in life? Whether that be family, whether it be job outlook, etc.
All those things, man. I mentor a ton of you guys, not you, but a lot of people who haven't gotten in yet, on my social media behind the scenes, answering DMs, sending voice messages to people, giving them advice. And so, here's what I tell people all the time on my DMs. I tell them, it would be ignorant to not consider and think about that you want a family. It would be ignorant not to consider what city you want to live in and how much it costs to live in that city. So I think you have to think about looking at your life and what you want to do when you're choosing a specialty, right? Especially. So you want to be a surgeon, but maybe you're 40 years old and you don't want to spend the next 10 years training to be a surgeon, because when you get out, you're going to miss your kids. You're not going to see them grow up. So I think number one, you definitely have to consider your family life. Number two, and this is one that's a little, I'm going to say this, and I don't know how people will receive this, but I always tell people, if you can see yourself doing anything else in life, and I mean anything else, like you would be happy being, an electrician, do that. And the reason I say that is you need to 100% know that being a doctor is where you want to be. There is nothing else on planet Earth that you could see yourself doing, because of all the hoops you have to jump through, the years and years and years of training that you go through, the money that you have to spend to become trained to be a doctor. It's real, man. So I think that's a huge, huge thing that people need to really consider. So I think family life, where you live, what it's going to cost, and how much it's going to cost you to become a physician is really important.
Man, I love that. I just got off a call with another podcast I'm going to be on, where they were wanting me to discuss, again, the BSMD program kind of comes up, that non-traditional student on the other end. But one of the things I've always told prospective students when, doing that prospective insight of, do I want to apply to this program, is if the answer to the question, do I want to be a doctor, is not 100% yes, it is a no, and you should not apply to an accelerated program, because it is such a big commitment, again, that you're making at 17, 18 years old. And it's a difficult decision. I mean, I remember that time. It was hard for me and my family, but that answer was 100% yes for me. So I couldn't turn down the opportunity. And that's something that I don't think is necessarily unique to an accelerated program, as you said, but it's something that definitely makes the road a lot easier and a lot more meaningful throughout medical training.
Yeah, and the money part's so hard. I mean, I don't know if you incurred debt, but this is a whole nother podcast talking about the expense of education and that. I mean, it's like, it is crazy, dude. I mean, it is crazy. Like I had So my parents paid for medical school up through my first 2 years, and then my sisters were getting married, and it was like, hey, we're going to ask you to take out loans. And of course, I was like, are you kidding me? Like, you guys have taken me this far? Like, yeah, I'll take out loans. Like, thank you for giving me what you've given me. Like, so I took out loans, and for me, I only had about, I think, 60 or 70 grand in loans, but that all capitalized over the years that I couldn't afford to pay it back and grew to 150 grand. Now I'm staring at 150 grand. I'm debt free now. We sold our house, paid off our debt, paid off our cars. That's a whole other story. But I decided that I wanted to be debt free. So I tell people it really also depends on how much money debt you're going to have to incur. Because, dude, I took Dave Ramsey's class with my wife several years ago when we were kind of like rebuilding our financial piece and trying to get out of debt. There was a guy in there who went to dental school, I think at UCLA, or yeah, UCLA, had like $500,000 in debt. Oh no, USC. He went to USC and he had $500,000 in debt. Bro, you don't come back from that.
Yeah.
Like, unless someone's writing a fat check, he is chasing that for his entire career. And that to me is absurd when you're committing a life of taking care of other people, but yet you're going to be slave to debt. It's sad.
Yeah, and I mean, I was fortunate enough to have a couple scholarships to get me through undergrad, but as soon as med school hit, yeah, I am plenty in the red right now. And I think
Monetize the social media, baby. Start paying it off.
it's only enough to take care of like some living expenses. It's not enough.
I know.
And my med school's, I mean, I think it's top 15 cheapest tuition in the entire country, but it's still, a pretty penny, and that's something that everyone should consider, old or young, going to med school. Try not to chase the name if it's going to put you in like $500,000 worth of debt. And if you guys are interested, go listen to my podcast that I made with Dr. Cellini, where we actually do talk about some of the different options of repayment for student loans, particularly with physicians. I am not aware of anything for dentists, but I know there are some public service ones where if you serve a certain amount of years and have on-time payments in an underserved area, then after a certain amount of time, the remaining debt that you have is just wiped clean. And
Yeah, if you don't miss a payment for 10 years, you cannot miss one payment. And I don't know about the underserved thing, but if you don't miss a payment for 10 years, the government will wipe your debt.
yeah, that's a whole different podcast.
Which is crazy.
And again,
I know. By the way, Cellini is
yes.
awesome. Because of you, I started commenting on his posts, and then you told me he's from Georgia. So I messaged him on Instagram, and dude, we're like today, like we were DMing back and forth. He's like, "Oh my God, you went to Georgia." Yep. I'm like, dude, yeah, let's talk. What a cool guy. Yeah. He's awesome.
First person I ever really traveled a long way to go interview. And again, one of the many, many mentors, including you, that I've picked up along the way, being on YouTube. But again, if you want to know more about kind of that financial part of medicine, go listen to that podcast episode. It's really, really good. But kind of moving forward, I'm curious to know how your med school experience was different coming in kind of later on. And I wouldn't even say you were that much later on, but I know for me, I literally could not legally drink my first 2 months of med school. And like I remember distinctly the first week or two when we were doing like our group sessions and like our first simulations, the people in my group who, had full previous careers as MAs, EMTs, field medics in the military, they're just spitting out all these drugs and procedures. I'm like, guys, I haven't even heard of that yet. And, for me, I got the feeling like I was playing catch up a little bit simply because I have not been alive as long as some of these other people. So I'm curious kind of on your end, if your experience was altered by, the age that you were coming into med school.
Yeah, it really wasn't a huge factor because I was 27. It was 1997 was the year I matriculated. So I was 27. And yeah, I mean, while a lot of the kids that were there were in their early 20s, I was just a few years behind them. I wasn't too far behind. I think probably the more challenging part for medical school for me was I'm not a great test taker. I never have been. I really felt like I had to work harder than everyone else. Like I had to put in 10 times the amount of work to make the same grades, and that's fine. That's what it took. That was me. That was my journey. But as far as age goes, I don't really think that it didn't really affect my experience at all.
Okay. Just it was out of curiosity more than anything. And
Yeah.
now we went over this in the plastic surgery interview, but real briefly, can you detail the route to plastic surgery or the many different routes to plastic surgery coming out of med school? Because I believe it's one of the longer residencies, right?
Yeah, it is. You know, there's two routes. So there's two ways to do it. The first way is you can do any surgical residency that you want. You complete that surgical residency. Yeah, you have to complete the surgical residency. So you complete a surgical residency and then you can apply for a plastic surgery residency. So I did general surgery and I did a year of research. So I spent 6 years doing that. And then I applied for plastic surgery, which was another 2 years. Now it's 3 years. It used to be 2 years. They've changed it. Now, if you apply for plastic surgery residency after you do your surgical training, it's another 3 years. So my co-resident was an orthopedic surgeon. He finished ortho and decided he wanted to be a plastic surgeon, and he did a 2-year fellowship. He was right behind me, and he's now a flourishing, amazing plastic surgeon in New Orleans. He's a great guy. So that's pathway number one. Pathway number two is if you know that you want to do plastic surgery from the get-go, then you can apply to the combined programs. And what that means is it's a 6-year program. Your first 3 years are going through all of the general surgery specialties. So you'll do ortho, neurosurgery, general surgery, vascular surgery, everything. And then your last 3 years are focused on plastic surgery. Some of those programs like Northwestern, where I finished my training for general surgery, I was friends with all those plastics guys, and I was in the lab for a year with them, with Tom Musto in a wound healing research lab. And those guys were forced to do research in the middle. So their programs were 7 years. So they did 3 of the general type stuff training. Then they had to do a year of research. And then they finished off their 3 years of plastics after that. So those are the two pathways.
Okay. And what drew you specifically to plastics?
It's kind of funny. So when I was at my first 3 years of general surgery were at Mount Sinai in Chicago. So it was knife and gun club, dude. It was like cracking chests all night, throwing in chest tubes, central lines, managing vents, hanging drips, like crazy trauma. I mean, it was like young kid trauma, shootings and car accidents. So the Northwestern guys would come over to our hospital to get their trauma experience because they just didn't get a lot of that stuff. And a couple of the plastics guys came over, and they kept kind of saying to me like, "Hey man, you should think about going in the lab." After I'd sort of developed a friendship with some of these guys, they're like, "You should think about coming in the lab with us next year. It'd be fun. Plastics is great." In the interim of that, just dealing with gunshot victims and some of the things that would happen to them, some of the plastics guys would come into the inner city hospitals to do some reconstructive work. So I kind of started to like combination of those guys being in my ear. Now I'm getting to see kind of some of the cool reconstructive stuff. I was like, man, this stuff is really cool. So that's what kind of pushed me to go into the lab. And then once I was in the lab, I was like, yeah, like I started thinking about lifestyle and not just money. Like everyone thinks that when I say that I'm talking about money. It had nothing to do with that. It was more about what did I see my day being like? I wanted to have kids. I wanted to get married. I didn't want to be in the OR until 3 in the morning or in the ER seeing traumas and gallbladders and all that stuff. So I just made a lifestyle decision that I felt that I could still do reconstructive work, which was very rewarding and I enjoyed it. So breast cancer and a lot of other things. But then I could also do some of the fun cosmetic cash pay stuff that I also think is very rewarding for those people. So very slowly in the lab, I kind of had this revelation and I was like, yeah, I'm going to apply to plastics. And so I transferred to Northwestern to finish my general surgery because I had 2 thoughts in my mind. One, if I don't get into plastics, I'm just trauma trained and I really need to do some more bread and butter general surgery, like surgical oncology and stuff. And then 2, I was like, I really kind of wanted the pedigree to help me get into plastics. And I hate to say that, but at that moment in my life, I felt that mattered. Looking back, I don't think it mattered one bit. So, and then you sort of alluded to that earlier that it doesn't really matter where you go, it's who you are. And you know, I didn't realize that, but I really transferred to Northwestern because I wanted to do more surgical oncology and a lot of that stuff, and that's why I made the
Yeah.
switch there.
And would you recommend doing such a long uh, after med school training coming out like later in life?
You know, so I didn't know I wanted to do plastics, so I decided that I had already put in 3.5 years of general surgery. I was like, I'm not gonna not finish. Like I have 2 years. I'm just gonna be double boarded. Like why would I just quit now? And I could have done that and tried to get in. Um, but you know, it's really what's really hard is I don't know if I'm a better surgeon because I did general surgery and I'm not scared to be in the belly and I did vascular and all that stuff versus the people who do combined programs that don't quite get that experience that I had. I'll never know because I'll never be able to stack myself up against some plastic surgeon that didn't go through that training. I think ultimately, when you finish training, whether you've been in one program or the other, what sets you apart is you have years and years and years to operate. At some point, you both level up and you're either good or you're not good. So I don't think the fact that I did general surgery in the long term makes me a better surgeon. But I think in the beginning, when I first came out, I probably had way more confidence in the OR than a lot of guys who come out from a 6-year program. Because I mean, you know, when we were chief residents in general surgery, we were alone in the OR doing opening up bellies and stopping bleeding and plugging aortas and like doing crazy stuff on our own. And you just you can't buy that experience, you know?
God, that sounds so cool.
It was amazing. I will say that as crazy as Sinai was and as some of the crazy stuff that I saw, I 100% left that place saying I can hold my own. Like I'm good. I know I don't know everything and I know I'm not experienced, but like I have the basics of trauma training that if I got into bleeding in the OR, I can handle it. You know, that's how I
Interesting,
felt.
because you're the third person that I've talked to that's trained at Sinai for the third different specialty. The other one is Cellini, who trained at Mount Sinai for interventional radiology, and then Max Feinstein, who trained for anesthesia. And I think all of them kind of have the same feeling where it's just like you just see some wild stuff, and by the time
It's
you're done, you're
crazy.
like, man, I think I can handle whatever comes through those doors because whatever comes through those doors was most likely not going to be as crazy as what I saw at Sinai.
Were those guys Sinai
Oh, they
Chicago or
were at Sinai,
Sinai
New
New
York,
York?
actually. That yeah. Okay.
I was Sinai Chicago, which still was like down the street from Cook County, man. It was like, you know, we would stand out back in the ER and just we'd hear the gunshots go off in Rogers Park and then we'd look down and our pagers would go off and we're like,
Yeah.
here we go.
Well, they were in good hands, I'm sure. No.
Yeah, it was fun, man. It was a great
Alrighty, so we're
experience.
getting close to the end. We got only a few more questions to wrap up with. The first one being kind of to summarize this whole journey that you've had with medicine. What are some tips that you would suggest for those older to improve their chances of getting into medical school and being a good, residency applicant?
Yeah. Um, I think it comes back to some of the things that we've already talked about. I think everyone has a story, right? So I think number one, the older people who are trying to get in just need to sit back. Number one, think about, do I really want to be a doctor? Kind of what we talked about before, right? Like first make that decision. Like, do I see myself only doing this? If the answer is yes, the next thing you have to do is think about how competitive you are and what you can do to become better. So for me, I knew that academics weren't my strength, but my bedside manner was my strength. So I played to my strengths while I tried to build my weaknesses too. I tried to do better in school. I knew that I was not going to get in on grades, that I had to get in on something else. So I really ramped up my experience and my experiences in volunteering and being around other doctors. So I think that my advice to those people is one, decide that you want to go. If you do know that you want to go, figure out what your strengths are, play to those, figure out what your weaknesses are, make those better to make yourself a better candidate. And then you just got to go for it, dude. I mean, look, I'll tell you that story I told you before about me calling a school. Can I tell this story real quick?
Go for it.
Okay. So a girl messages me on Instagram and she's like, "Hey, Dr. Brown, I've been following you forever. My husband is just like you. He's a little bit older. He's not on social media though. He's not really into it, but I show him all your videos all the time. He's in his late 20s. Becoming a doctor has been his dream, but didn't have really good grades, but he's jumping back on the bandwagon. He's going to start taking classes and he's taking the MCAT soon and he's going to apply." Right. So I said, cool. I was like, "Can I give you a tip?" So I give her all these tips to kind of pump him up and help him out. She's like, "I'll show him whatever you send me." I said, "Tell him that no one on the planet probably is going to walk down to his local medical school and walk into the admissions office and try to talk to someone and tell his story. I need you to tell him to go put his neck out there and just give it a shot." So they lived in Illinois. So months go by and this woman messages me again. She goes, "I just want to tell you something." And I literally almost start to cry when I talk about this every time because it chokes me up so much. She's like, "My husband took your advice. He went down to the school here in Illinois. He went into the admissions office. He told them his whole story. He got an interview and he got into school." So, I mean, that kind of stuff, it's like that's life-changing stuff, right? And I never, ever, ever thought that he would really say what I said or take my advice or do what I said. But it just goes to show you that you just kind of have to you got to go put your neck out there and put yourself in front of people if you want things to happen because no one's going to do it for you.
Very
crazy, right?
Yeah, this is the joy of
I
social
literally
media.
get choked up like when I talk about it because I remember the moment when I tapped on the DM and I started reading it and I was sitting outside of my office in my car about to go home and I literally started like not bawling but like I started tearing. I was like, "Holy shit, the guy did it. Like he freaking did it." And had she not told him that, he might still be trying to get into med school or he might not have gotten in thinking I failed or whatever, but it was pretty intense. Like, but that's the impact. So when people talk about social media and how horrible it is, this is where I say to them, for me, this is where it's awesome. This is where I love it. I got to impact a life from across the country. I've never met the guy. I don't know what he looks like. I don't know what his wife looks like. But like this dude's going to become a doctor and probably a good one, you know?
Yeah, and I mean that's encouraging for me as I continue with social media throughout med school and as I become whatever doctor that these next few years will determine. But
You're going to kill it, dude. You're already killing it.
it's I do still get some of those stories. I mean, literally we just welcomed the new class of 2026 here, and I'm going to the school gym, and I'd get recognized and stopped and saying like big fan videos, you
That's
and I
awesome.
actually got a comment on one of my videos the other day that said I mentioned you in my application to George like MCG for this cycle and I was just like I I I, I don't know how to digest that.
Dude, I get it, because you're a humble guy, and I'm a humble guy too, and I have the attitude sometimes. I'm like, why would anyone listen to me? But I realize now why people listen, and you're the same way, dude. Like, I mean, social media when it's used right. Like, look, I know I post crazy, fun videos, stupid things. Sometimes it's silly stuff because it's just fun for me. But at the end of the day, I'm trying to motivate people and let people see that I'm a regular guy and you're a regular guy too or woman. And you can do what I'm doing. Anything one person can do, another person can do. So I will tell you that the moments that I enjoy on social media are the behind the scenes DMs that none of you will ever know about. And I'm sure you get that too. And it's really, really humbling when people stop you and say that. So congratulations, because your channel is amazing and your videos, I've started watching them, are amazing. And it's really going to help people find their way. And it's very valuable.
Thank you, thank you. I mean, it's really a joy to make this and really a privilege. And I thank everybody watching and listening. And kind of to that point, that leads us to the last question to all those watching or listening who are more than likely pre-meds in high school, college, who are looking at this wanting to be in my shoes and your shoes one day.
Mhm.
what's the one advice you would give to that prospective medical student and that prospective physician?
Okay. I message this to kids all the time. I get messages from 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds in high school, and they ask me the same question. The one piece of advice that I would give young people trying to become a doctor is the following: don't move too fast. In the world today, on social media, it's easy to compare yourself and to want to move fast. I call it the Amazon Prime syndrome. People want it yesterday, right? We're so used to getting things so fast. I feel like as kids, I'm honored that they are so excited to become doctors, but don't get ahead of yourself. Don't forget to be a kid. You have the rest of your life to be a doctor. And I think that when these kids start to take AP and graduate early, and I'm going to go to college and finish it in 2 years, and I'm going to apply to med school, and I know you did it early, so I'd be interested to hear your perspective. But I always tell these kids, don't rob yourself of your youth, because there's so much innocence to the early time in your life that I am here to tell you, as a 51-year-old guy, you will never get it back. And you have to enjoy it. And you have to really sit back and say, why am I trying to move so fast? And so for you, it may be different than someone else. And I'm not saying it's wrong to do it at a young age, but I tell these 14 and 15-year-olds, just take it easy. Like, really think about how fast you're moving and try not to rob yourself of certain experiences.
That's excellent advice. And just a brief tangent on that, just to get my perspective. I agree 10,000% with that, because I definitely feel like the program, for better or worse, made me mature a lot faster than I wanted to. And whether or not that's a good or bad thing, I have no idea. But I still would second your advice to anybody watching or listening. Enjoy it. It's a long, long process. And Amazon Prime syndrome is a hilariously accurate way of putting it.
That's my thing.
But it's true. It's a long road. We all want to get to a destination all the time, but cliche. The journey is where you have the most fun and you learn the most. And I'm very much picking up on that as I'm going through my clinical year.
I love it, man. You're doing great. And I don't want kids to think that it's not okay to move fast. I just, the ones that message me seem like they're wanting to get to where I am, like tomorrow. And I'm like, oh man, it's such a long road. Just take a deep breath, go enjoy life a little bit, But then again, there's people like you that do it, man. And you're grounded, right? Like, it depends on who you are. You're going to slay it, and you're not going to miss out on experiences, but you get the gist. But I love that, man. You're doing awesome.
Thank you so much. And Ken, thank you, Dr. Brown, for taking the time out of your busy day to be on the podcast. Links for all his socials will be in the description, show notes, and everything. Go check out his videos if you haven't. And I really look forward to the next time I'm over there on the West Coast. We'll hang out.
Heck yeah, man. I'm looking forward to it. And I got to get back down to Georgia and come see you guys. I miss it.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to the Beyond the Scope podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's guest, and to make sure that you don't miss a single episode, make sure that you follow Beyond the Scope on all streaming platforms, as well as if you want to see the full video cut, subscribe to my YouTube channel, NDMD. As always, subscribe, like, follow, comment, all that good stuff, and we'll see you in the next one.